Hello, 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 and welcome to Rainbows Rising, where we ascend together. I'm your host, Rainbow Raaja, and I have a wonderful guest for you all today. I have Reverend Valerie, who has joined us on the show to talk about the integration of non-traditional spiritual practices into the fundamental Christian belief system and the practices that come from that background. Welcome, Reverend Valerie. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. So tell us a little bit about your journey and what drew you to the work that you do.
Yes. So I grew up in a pretty conservative Christian denomination. I grew up in the Nazarene Church and other non-denominational um, churches our family attended. And um, I kind of went from being a ardent follower of evangelical Christianity to a very open, progressive Christian sort of spiritualist within the last 20 years. So, growing up with believing in a certain very narrow understanding of the world in a set belief system can sometimes, most of the time, end up being pretty toxic to the person involved or the people involved, because we find out very quickly that we don't fit. We don't fit in those boxes. And but for me, I had these profound experiences, profound spiritual moments that sort of kept me within what I thought was right, and eventually was kind of set free out of that box and realized, that spirit is everywhere, in all places, and always speaking to us through many, many, many different avenues. Um, so yeah, that's kind of my journey in a snapshot. I went from being a person who believed in this sort of strict duality of belief or non-belief, heaven or hell, and at a very young age, at different Christian camps and whatnot, this notion that if you do not believe in a certain way, you will, burn in hell. And I took that on as like, to be a good person, I really need to help people learn the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And that was hard for me, and I'm sure annoying for other people. But luckily, when I entered college and then later on in seminary, I just became more and more open through life experience, my own feelings, my own interactions with spirit, source, God, universe, whatever you want to call, and also academically, really learning some things about our scriptures, these texts we hold as sacred, and how we understand them in which in the context in which they were written, instead of projecting our sort of linear black and white post enlightenment Western world views.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times we forget that scripture was written how many thousands of years ago, and that there was a different dynamic in society, right?
Absolutely. So when you think of, let's just take the New Testament, okay, and you have Gospels and epistles, and you have letters from Paul to these different churches, and you take these letters and you try to interpret what's going on and what's happening. Well, imagine if you know you and I, Rainbow, I write you a letter today, and somebody 2,000 years later is trying to figure out what they can ascertain from that letter. What
Mhm.
would you have to really do to understand that letter? Well, you'd have to look at the original context. What
You'd
was
have
our relationship?
Yeah, you'd have to also understand like the roles of society, the roles of women, the
Absolutely.
roles, like what kind of jobs that we had, the lingo, whatever the way people talked about things. I mean, wow, well, that's such a great point of like really breaking down how much, like how different it has become. I think we really forget because we've only lived here how many years? Some of us 50 years, some of us 25 years, and we forget how old, like truly old, these scriptures are, and how evolved we've become, and how dynamic our society is, and how we as people have really evolved our understanding of ourselves.
Absolutely. 100%. There are so many different aspects to look at when you're interpreting scripture. That's why, when you hear someone just kind of dropping scripture here and there to defend an argument, that's not it's not a good use. We're talking about an ancient text that deserves the respect of truly understanding who was the author of that text, who are they intending to see that text, what was their language, what was the, like you said, the culture. um,
Mhm.
in my journey specifically, being a female pastor for 7 years, um, there's scriptures that were wielded against me, right, as an oppressive tool. And to take someone back and say, okay, let's look. We're talking about human systems in which women in the time of Christ were often considered property, okay? And note that the Christ person, or Yeshua, was often engaging with women, empowering women. So when we call ourselves Christians or Christ followers, we're actually following this sort of rebellious um, energy that doesn't conform to the systems of his day.
Mhm.
So then what does that indicate for us in this time, 2000 plus years later?
Mhm.
So there's a lot of considerations for how we understand and apply to our life. So
I know that you had originally kind of started talking about the impact of fundamental religion and belief systems on the individual's sense of self, the individual's way of interacting with others and judging others.
yeah.
And I think that's a really powerful topic that isn't breached very often,
Mhm.
just because of how controversial it is. And it's not just Christian religions that do this. I mean, there are literally thousands of religions now, and some of them can be very strict in their ways. And what do you have to say about that, and working with that kind of I guess background, and how can people feel empowered in that, or feel safe exploring these other sides of themselves?
Yeah, great question. So I think, so one thing about religion that I would first comment on is just a metaphor that, we're all traveling on our own paths up a mountain. And at the end of the day, there are many different ways up that mountain to see the moon. And so perhaps, in our journeys and all these different religions out there that are trying to understand something about the universe, we're trying to say something about God, our creation, our existence, and make meaning from it, right? And when you're talking about these strict rules that I know well, and a lot of us that grew up in fundamental religions, of course, there's this aspect of control over our sexuality, control over how we express that, control over our self-expression, our language, so many ways in which religions try to enforce and constrict and control. Because at the end of the day, all of us in all our different religions, no matter what it is, we're sort of in this dance with the divine, and we're interpreting it. And then in our human need to control, we try to exert that through religion. And I think one thing that has really bothered me about the sort of my own evangelical upbringing, is some of the even conditioning music. We sing about how we're very unworthy, how we're unlovable. Yet that can't be further from the truth. If we are of source energy, if we come from, if everything there is, if you subscribe to this belief system, if everything that is comes from this source being, this creating, birthing being, right? Then you are of that light, you are of that love, and you are here for a purpose that aligns with love. And in that, there is freedom, right? There's freedom of expression, there's freedom of being, there's freedom to be in the world as you feel like you are intended to be.
Now, I actually, like, when you were talking about that, I wanted to touch on, like, I didn't grow up with, like, my parents were not really into religion. My mom is, like, really private about her belief systems, and my dad is a Jack Mormon, so I talked about this on another episode, but he left the church, and so, like, my grandma and grandpa would take me to Mormon church a lot growing up. It was only when they would come and visit, but I got enough time there to ask questions and, really evaluate whether or not this was something I resonated with. And at first, I really loved the community. They were so welcoming. They were so polite. No matter what the Mormons believe, the community of that, they are all their children are just polite, and they're working hard at school. They're really, really sweet, genuine people. But for some reason, like, what they were teaching didn't make any sense, and I had real legitimate questions, like trying to understand how is that possible when, like you were saying, we're all pieces of source, or if you want to do the whole we are children of God. If we are children of God, why are we going around judging everyone? Like, I think in Matthew they even talk about not judging people. I kind of remember that a little bit. So it's like, why are we running around telling people what to believe? Isn't that God's job? Why are we trying to take over God's job? That doesn't, like, if you have kids, you wouldn't want your other kid disciplining your other kid. That's the parent's job. So that has always confused me with anybody in a religion. Like, why are we running around telling people what to believe? And also, like, expanding out from that, like, you can't do this, you can't do that. Somebody's born with something, like, homosexuality or
Yeah,
something like that, or a disability, or
right.
a medical condition, and suddenly they're being abolished from the church just because of who they are. I don't think God is like that. I mean, he made them that way, right? He made them that way. So these are like little things that have always turned me away, but I know I've had experiences with angels. I've had experiences with God. Would I consider myself a Christian or a Catholic or a Mormon? No, I think I have connected with Christ consciousness.
Yes.
I have connected with angels, and I work like with angels in healing sessions. And I have worked with Mother Mary when um, I had some life stuff that calling on her energy and on her spirit was very beneficial for me. So I know that this is how I integrate, coming from somebody who's not Christian or Catholic, I'm able to integrate these things that do connect with me, and they warm my heart, and these energies and these beings, these ancestors
Right.
that have connected with me. I can incorporate them into my practice. Um, do you
Yeah.
know of a safe way for Christians or Catholics or Mormons or you know the witnesses,
Jehovah's Witnesses. Yeah.
yeah, those guys. Do you have a way that they can safely begin to like explore these things that are a little threatening, maybe a little scary? Like, is my God okay with this? How can they know that this is a safe thing to do? You know?
Yes. I think what for me, and I know not everyone is going to go to seminary, not everyone's going to get, masters of divinity and spend a lot of time studying, we all have different life paths, but I think, any of that curiosity, that little spark of, but this just doesn't necessarily line up, I think you can figure out avenues to follow that and see what other interpretations are out there, what other perspectives are being examined. Because I myself was so focused on one narrow understanding that when I went to seminary and I had, professors who were scholars and theologians, the world opened up because there were so many different perspectives.
Mm.
There were so many different lenses in which people understood scripture or even pushed back in different contexts. And so I think taking that little piece of, I wonder why my church, teaches this. It doesn't feel right. Pay attention to what your feelings are saying, what is coming from within that says, I don't necessarily align with that, or I don't necessarily ascribe with that. Or maybe you do, but you can see, your wife or husband or child doesn't get on board with that particular belief. So get out there, and we have this thing called the internet now. It's great. And start seeing what do different denominations, how do they come about these different perspectives? The United Church of Christ, where I was most recently a pastor, is very open and affirming of every belief system. We encourage doubting and sort of this individualized take on scripture. See, okay, now how does this denomination, why do they understand it so differently than Catholicism or Southern Baptist? What are the differences and why? And once you start seeing the different takes on that, then that sense of everything having to be so narrow and having to be so black and white and having to be constricted sort of starts to lift. And then you realize that there's a whole lot more. There's a whole lot of gray, areas of gray in which you can dive into to feel empowered that you can figure out what you think. And if you want to take it further, you can study Hebrew and Greek. You can study the culture. You can, you can get, you can read articles by theologians and scholars and see what do the people that really know the original language of this, what do they say, and how do those folks even have different opinions amongst themselves? I think we get stuck in this sort of, a lot of people crave black and white answers, right? And that's what fundamental religion offers, a black and white answer. But at some point in your faith journey or your spiritual journey, it's just not enough anymore, because nothing fits in black and white boxes. That's not the reality of our world. And I would say, get in touch with
If it were, all women and all men would look the same, and we would have no individuality and no personalities. It would be
how blah would that be?
It would be. So you were, bringing up this, the fact that you were a pastor at a church that really encouraged questioning. Now I know in I've been to a few churches in my day. I have never been to a place that, they say they encourage questioning, but they don't really encourage, you know what I mean? They're like, oh yes, you just have to have faith. You just have to, you should pray on that. You should pray on that. But to hear the way you were explaining it, sounds like your church was very based in logic and almost a scientific method, in a way where you're having to like really evaluate your own experiences and look at other people's experiences. And I know maybe the scientific method, in parentheses, is not the best way of describing that, but like it did seem very logical the way you were explaining it. And the best way I can think to explain that is like, looking at it from this like science, like you're testing. You're literally testing all these things to see if it fits in your brackets. And I thought that was just really intriguing. I haven't heard any other person of traditional religion talk about it in that way. So
yeah, it was definitely an evolution from where I started, sort of the denominational affiliation that I started with. And I'm ordained Disciples of Christ which share, not to get all churchy, but it shares the table or shares standing with United Church of Christ, and their sort of fundamental belief is that God is working through us in different ways, and we're siblings together, right? And so when other progressive pastors and I engage with congregants that don't, that are questioning or doubting, I like to ask, what do you think? Here's the historical context. Here's what that word means in Greek or Hebrew. And this is what I think, but what do you think? And what do you think the deeper message is? Because you might read something and get a completely different idea, and maybe that's what you're supposed to get that day. Maybe that's how Spirit's inspiring you right then, right?
So what happens when you say like, oh yeah, what do you think? And then the other person is saying something that just doesn't feel right to you, and you're just getting so frustrated because you feel like they're missing the point you're trying to get across. And you know what? They're wrong. They're super wrong. What is wrong with these people? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And in my journey as a pastor, I've had a lot of people that have this sort of very clear understanding in their mind of what things have meant, because that's how I was taught. I was raised in the church, I'm 80 years old and I've always believed this. Okay, well, here's some new information that maybe you hadn't been introduced to before. Okay, so let's just take the example of, well, God is a man, right? God's not only a man, but he's a white man, and he lives in the sky, and he's angry a lot of times, right? Well, okay, so that's your perspective of God, right? Now, let me introduce you this new information, right? We talk about just using scripture. If you just want to stay inside the Christian religion, right? Let's talk about in Genesis 1, the Spirit of God is hovering over the water. Now, the word there for spirit is can be translated as breath, breath and spirit, and this presence is hovering, right? And in Hebrew, this word is ruach, right? Now, the word ruach is actually feminine, a feminine word in Hebrew. Okay, so this Spirit of God, which has this, for whatever reason, is feminine, is hovering over and sort of births the earth into existence, right? That's how the story goes. So
Aren't women the only ones that can birth things? I just want to point that out.
yeah, that's my understanding as well, right? So then you have this piece of information that's not only inside of this is their belief system, that Genesis 1 was literal. I would say, maybe this was mythical and there's a deeper truth happening there. It's pointing to something else. But so let's stick with the person's belief system, and you say, okay, so this ruach births sort of this order and existence and living things. So what does that tell you? What could that indicate about God in their belief structure? And that becomes that then challenges their belief system and hopefully opens them up to consider other possibilities. And sometimes I'll just say, I just can't get there. I can't get there. And I'll say, if you need to think of God as a father, you're more than welcome to do so, right? But I can also think of God as mother and sister and auntie, right?
It's really interesting because, like I said, I've interacted with God's source energy, and every time I connect with that source energy, I'm not talking Gaia, I'm not talking Earth, I'm not talking the specific angels, I'm talking somehow I bypassed, like, God knows how far out, like I was really far out there. And what I connected with was 100% a female energy.
Yeah.
But I get the sense that it can be either.
Absolutely.
Or more, because like we are human, and I'm sure there are other planets with life. Like, who's to say there aren't more genders out there? Who knows at this point?
Right. I had a transgender friend in seminary. She came out in seminary, and that was hard.
Wow, that was so courageous.
So courageous. And I was honored to be one of the first people. She said, I'm getting ready to go public with this. And I won't, say any names or anything. But she was affiliated with a certain denomination that is not quite there yet in their language. But to her, God was trans. God was trans because the elements that she had experienced in her life of God, I mean, had her experience written all over them, right? And and I've experienced God as both and neither as well. So,
just a blank slate for us to mirror our divinity onto it. It is such a beautiful, beautiful experience connecting with that source energy, because I really think God becomes a mirror for us to see our own divinity through.
Yes, I think one of my beliefs at my heart is that we are created in the image of God, which you can see also in Genesis.
Either that, or God is created through the image of us.
Right, and I think you could argue that throughout history, the patriarchy and man, and I mean man as in male, has created God in man's image, and therefore it has become a limited image. And so, I would push back and say, you have created God in that image, and some of that image is right, and some of that image is great, and life affirming.
Mm-hmm.
And some of what we've created here, we gotta understand that if only one group of people creates what the image of the creator is, then everyone else is left out, right? So there's no one.
And that's an interesting point. What about all of these other belief systems that have like the Norse gods and the Greek gods?
Right.
And then we have like the Native Americans who have, they're not really gods. They're like really incredible spirits that created the sky, and the Egyptian lady who created the sky. And like I understand that Christians and Catholics are like, no, our God is the ultimate God, and da, da, da. But do these other deities exist as well? Like, who's to say they don't? And why can't existence and religion and belief systems, like, why can't we see it as a big puzzle? And instead of becoming separate, start weaving these elements together. Because when I was younger and I had no one to go to for all of these things, I would sit under the stars and I would talk to the stars and I would get visions. And like when I was receiving these visions, because I was like, I don't believe in God. God is mean, right? I mean, I don't believe that anymore. But at the time, I was like, God is super mean. I don't like this guy.
I don't believe in that God either.
So I was like laying out under the stars crying about my life, because that's what an emo teenager does.
Absolutely.
And I was like, ah. And then I would get these visions of like how the universe came to be. And then I was like, well, if the universe came to be like that, then like, what about God? Like, what is God? And it was like, yeah, God's real, but so are all these other things. And I was like, aliens, what about those? And it was like, yeah, them too. And I was like, I don't want to believe in those. And they came much later. But
no, me too. I'm getting there. Yeah, with the I'm like definitely out there.
And if there are aliens, that means God created them too.
Right.
Which then, like, what does God's world look like? Like, has anybody ever thought, like, God can't be hanging out on the other side of this simulation all by himself. He's got a mom, he's got a dad, he's got a brother and a sister and a crazy Uncle Jerry. So if God has a world, does that mean all of his family members are also gods? like that's where my train of thought goes. Like, there's this ultimate God. Like, how lonely that must be. Like, why does nobody sympathize with this poor guy? Like, can we stop praying to him? Can we give him a break?
Yeah, I think actually that is such a good point, because I think I believe in my spirit God does want relationship with us. God does want to spend time with us, or source, whatever you want to call this creator being. You know, I do believe
life source that flows through all and has a consciousness.
Yes, I can get on board with that 100%. And you know, there are so many different belief systems, as many as there are people, right? We all have different belief systems, and I'm sure half of us don't know what we think, and think one thing one day and believe something else the next day.
But little paradox boxes.
Right.
Paraboxes.
And so some of the work that I've tried to do in my ministry, and also now as doing the coach thing, is how have our belief systems that maybe weren't so healthy, that maybe shoved us in a box, that maybe told us we can't do this and we can't do that. No, you're a woman, you can't do that. You need to be a wife. You need to be submissive. You need to do this. What are those things that are going on in our subconscious? And how do we say, oh, here, gotcha there? And how can we transform those? Because they're so alive in our society. They're alive in a lot of our religions, and they're alive in our minds. And I think it's time. The divine feminine is alive, and she is bursting forth, and she's saying, I am here, and it's time that we listen.
You know, touching back on the whole, like, women are these submissive, we have to like make sandwiches for men thing.
Oh, gosh.
That's it's a stereotype, right? Go make me a sandwich and get me a beer. I know when you were talking about that, I kind of was seeing, like, why would God want that? Like, that's such a disempowering position. we're not able to live our truth if someone is ordering us around. And
Yes.
like, why has this been God's message? Once again,
Yeah.
parentheticals. Like, why is this God's message for women?
Right.
Why are women targeted as these slave people? And
Right.
and then we like go a little deeper. I don't like to touch on these things, but go a little deeper into like just not that long ago, other people of other cultures, they were the actual slaves and they were just like completely rejected. They're demons. Let's not even deal with them. Like, I'm glad we've evolved past that. Thank literally God for that.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, these are all things that have come up for me, like where I'm looking at the greater picture of it, and I'm like, this seems so depressing. Like, why would anyone just give themselves over to this
Right.
like they're literally locking, they're like, I'm just gonna walk right into this cage, I'm going to turn around, I'm gonna lock this cage, and now I'm locked in this cage.
Yeah. And I think that is such a good point because we have to remember that the powerful and privileged, they have written history. They literally history, right? They have told the masses this is God's will, right? Instead of empowering the individual to get in touch with source energy yourself,
Hmm.
figure out what your soul path is. What did I come, why am I here? What do I want to do? What do I feel like I'm called to do or that I need to do with my life?
We were
Um,
always told to go repent to the male bishop or the male. Yeah, it's always the bishop, right? He's the one that sits in a little box and tells you how many Marys you got to do.
oh yeah, that would be the Catholic priest, right?
Oh yeah,
Uh,
no, that guy. You go in there, you're like, oh my gosh, I thought about doing naughty things today. You got 600 Hail Marys you gotta go do.
and I just have to do this quick plug. I during seminary I went on a couple of spiritual retreats, and I know we're eventually wanting to get into actual spiritual practices here soon. And I
Hmm.
stayed at, a few monasteries, and I stayed with some sisters. And I was I know the first time, I didn't grow up Catholic, right? So it was a little different. But I remember thinking, okay, this is going to be, just the stereotypical thing. These women were incredibly not only intelligent, spiritually evolved, profound individual thinkers who, and I won't ever forget, on one of these retreats, one of the sisters told me, she said, if everyone just took their belief system, and it's like, you're digging a hole, right? And you're digging, and the more deep you get into your own belief system and religion, the more you see that we're all digging towards the same thing. And I was like,
Oh, how beautiful. I love that.
and some of the most inspiring women. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, which is I'm sure all of you, I got my master's of divinity, but I specialized in topics of women, church, and society, which is a fancy way of saying feminist theology. And
Oh, really? We couldn't tell. Sorry.
no. So some of these women, these Catholic sisters, they have gone so deep in their own faith. And just like, and this kind of leads into the contemplatives, right? Those who practiced contemplative prayer or centering prayer throughout history, who have kind of, gone away from the masses and gotten really quiet and
Mhm.
really listened, to what divine has to say. And then you get into other religions, and there seems to be a bit of that everywhere, this meditation, this sense of, if I allow myself to be right here and now and just open myself, then divinity has a conduit because I'm quiet. can hear, And so in seminary, I started getting really into meditation, centering prayer, whatever your tradition, whatever you want to call it. And it really changed my life. And I think this is something, no matter what your faith tradition, when you get quiet and listen and get in tune with your own spirit and that of source, then you can start finding out what is true for me. What do I really think about God? What do I really think about the world? And that's kind of what started sort of this, because used to it was a lot of prayer, attempt to listen, listening through scriptures and other texts and books, and all of that was great. And I had great interactions with source. But once I learned that I don't have to do anything, I can sit here and be still, right? If you're Christian, you'll say, "Be still and know that I am God," right? From Psalms. And if you of different faiths, Taoist.
It's more like be still and still everything within you, your mind. Like, pay attention to what you're feeling, but for the most part, like, don't give your attention to any one thing. You're just aware. And when you can do that and you fall, it's almost like falling into this infinite, vast, beautiful fishbowl of whatever it is. It's like gooey awesomeness. I don't know if that's how you experience it, but I like fall into this infinite blackness that then opens up into visions or interactions with whomever. And I mean, sometimes I see
you start dreaming,
lives and karma stuff and future stuff. I mean, and it's that stillness.
Yes. And that, I think, it's a lot of people listening might think, "Oh, I can't be still. You should hear my mind." And I was the most anxious person.
I had bipolar type 1, so I can tell you, I had a real struggle with it at first too.
Yeah. So on a very real level that when we talk about meditation, people maybe have these preconceived notions and already have told themselves that they can't do it. But I truly believe everyone, and I've actually had the privilege of working with someone that also had bipolar and helping and I realized, depending on who you are, there's different methods, there's different guided meditations, but I was able to just gently help her find this space. And time after time, people have reported back, this works. This gets me in touch with something much bigger than I am. And if we want to go back and believe, and talk about Ruach, right? This divine spirit. And we want to talk about her birthing us into existence. And when we're silent and we're inviting Ruach to come and speak with us and just be opening to hear what she has to say, that's you're interacting with the source of life, right? So there's so many ways to go about it, though.
And
I play. What was that?
Anybody out there listening, if you happen to have racing thoughts or emotions that are just up and down, and you can't sit still, like you're fidgety, you've got all kinds of things. What I recommend, and I have an actual podcast where I take you through the grounding meditation. Ground yourself. Do grounding every day. Like if you do grounding every single day for a week, meditation will feel super, super easy. Because when you're grounding, you're actually releasing all of the energy that does not belong to you. That's what all those thoughts, that's what all those emotions are. When you redirect them into the earth and you're recycling them back into the earth, you are clearing your system so that you can just be. You can't be if you have a bunch of beings attached to you. So you gotta clear all that out.
And that's so funny. That's exactly what I was doing before we came on here today to record this, was take my shoes off, put my feet in the grass, ground myself, release some of that stuff. And sometimes through guided meditation, I've heard a lot of different people go about it as, you're giving yourself permission to release this stuff into the river. It's flowing around the river bend. And when it's around that river bend, it's just whatever those anxieties are, just let them fall into God's hands for now, or whoever you want to imagine on the other side, whatever you believe. Just
Why do you want to carry the stressors, you guys? Why are you carrying all that stress? Just dump it in the river. Like when I do a guided meditation, they're like, you're laying in the river and it's washing away your stuff. I'm like, girl, I'm just get under the waterfall and have it wash all away. I want it gone.
I want high water pressure, okay?
If I could just set myself on fire, that's what I'd be doing. Forget the water method. Light me on fire. Burn it out of me.
Yeah, there's so many different ways, but I love, yes, when you're working with the earth and grounding and maybe doing visualization. I play with white light in my guided meditation. When I offer guided meditations,
that's a great one. That's a great one.
Divine white light, and it's a source of healing. It's a source of absorbing negative, releasing baggage, releasing guilt, shame. I work with that, and both in groups and individuals. And it's really, this white light is really profound in that it's always available to us. No matter who you are, there's this, you can tap into this light. You don't need someone else to do it for you. Sometimes it's helpful to have, listen to a guided meditation. But I believe each and every one of us has some way that we can allow ourselves to get in that space of receiving.
Yeah, it takes patience.
Yeah.
It takes trust. And it just takes you deciding, I'm going to stop what I'm doing right now. Like 5 minutes isn't going to change anything you are doing. Your laundry just got done. 5 minutes isn't going to change anything. So you sit, you say, okay, I trust it's okay to let go. You surrender to the fact that it's time to let go. And then you just be. You don't think about anything, like all of your stressors, all of those bills or whatever you're thinking about. Every time a thought comes up, just say, I will get back to this later. I don't need this right now. This is me time. And once it gets quiet, set a timer for 5 minutes and just sit in the quiet.
And yeah, like you said, the patience with yourself. If you all of a sudden are starting to think, what are we having for,
dinner
or dinner tonight, and what do we need, is who's making it, or the errands I have to run. It's okay to just laugh at yourself and say, oh, I'm supposed to be being quiet right now, so I'm just going to let that go, and then just go back. And that's the process of returning to the stillness, and it's literally part of it. And it's like flexing a muscle, it'll become.
You gotta be forgiving of yourself. You gotta remember, like, you're human and you gotta flex that muscle. You gotta practice it. Oh man.
Be gentle with yourselves. Know that you can laugh, and God will probably, it's like a child, when your child's learning how to walk and they stumble and fall. Well, you're not going to yell at them. You're not going to be disappointed. You're going to say they're learning. And you're just going to
look, you did 1 step today, and yesterday you had 0 steps.
Yeah.
So if any of you guys listening, if you don't meditate, which, I'm assuming most of you who are listening do, like, stop this, when this podcast is over, just take 5 minutes, and just be still.
Yeah.
It'll do wonders. You might even hear God's source energy. Mm-hmm. You might have a communication with them and talk with them. It's so profound when those moments happen, when you'll open.
Probably start to sense more of your spiritual gifting. Like clairaudience is one of my, I get things that I hear in my mind clearly when I allow myself to be clear enough to hear. And I know that sometimes meditation can help you clear out so you can tap into some of those gifts that you already have.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I like to, I have, my anxiety is little knots in my stomach. And so I like to focus on those lower chakras sometimes, it kind of helps
Just breathe into them.
breathe into them,
Mhm.
invite that white light to shine upon them and see what gooey, yucky stuff needs to be absorbed, and just allow it to release. And just being willing, say, yeah, I don't want to carry that anymore. I can't control the outcome of it anyways.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm gonna let that little knot go then.
Well, this has been such an enlightening interview, like so exciting, so fun.
Great.
Is there anything you'd like to share with the listeners before we, close out for the day?
The message that I just really feel like I want to share is that no matter who you are, no matter what you're going through, is my belief that this God energy smiles upon you with love and acknowledges your goodness. If you could only see your goodness as well. And we all have to remind ourselves of that, and the last thing is, if you have any questions, you can contact me on my email. I offer guided meditations, spiritual advisory, a combination of the both. My email is just Val rocks ROCKS bright BRIGHT at iCloud.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I'll put your information in the text below or in the text wherever the information of the podcast is. You guys know where it is. You go look for it.
And also you can find me on my Facebook page, Valerie K. Austin, and message me there if you want. I'd love to hear from you. So
awesome. Well, I'll put those down into the description. And I really, really appreciate you taking this time today and really broaching some like really tough, controversial. Those are tough subjects that are, a lot of people touch on those. So
yeah,
going there.
Yes. And, I'm sure some people might have some pushback.
If you guys do, email me. I want to hear that pushback. Give it to me.
There's probably nothing you can say at this point that I haven't already heard. So. But you never know. You never know. But this has been such a delight. Thank you, Rainbow. I just love.
Thank you, Valerie, Reverend Valerie. I am so grateful for your time today. Thank you, all of you out there. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview as much as we. This was so fun. And I'm so excited that we all can continue to ascend together. Have a good day, guys. Bye. Are you ready to ascend to the next level? This is Rainbow-raaja, your spirit guide calling. Please be sure to keep all arms and legs inside your vessel at all times. I'm just here to remind you to take some time today. Support Rainbow's Rising podcast. Go. Join the Discord community. Check out the Patreon. Get some stickers, custom tarot cards. Check out the merch. The merch. You know you want to. Go connect with Rainbow-raaja. Maybe even get a session. Who knows? Your support helps make this show possible. And she loves to support you. Help support her too. Once again, this is Rainbow-raaja, your spirit guide, guiding you to your ascension.